Hi guys, welcome back to our Leadership in the Bible series. So last week we talked about Rehoboam and the mistakes that he made, and we learned from those mistakes, and this week we are going to focus on a famous king's great deeds. I know that I said we were going to talk about David because he has great deeds and then also the times that he messed up, but I'm actually going to split that into two separate lessons so we have a little more time to talk about each one. So we're going to start diving right in, and we're going to talk about God's choosing of David as his kind of champion to be king, right? So at this point, God is sending the prophet Samuel to talk to a man called Jesse of Bethlehem, and God is going to choose one of his sons to be the next king, right? To replace King Saul. So he just got into town, and he's worried about the people in town thinking that because he's from the king, he's gonna, attack them or something. So they asked him, "Hey, are you coming to hurt us?" And Samuel said, "No, I come in peace. I've come to sacrifice to the Lord. Consecrate yourselves and come to the sacrifice with me." Then he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. So we're right now in 1 Samuel chapter 16. We're starting in verse 5, and we're going to go through 13. So when they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab and thought, "Surely the Lord's anointed stands here before the Lord." But the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him." The Lord does not look at the things that people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Then Jesse called Abinadab and had him pass in front of Samuel. But Samuel said, "The Lord has not chosen this one either." Jesse then had Shammah pass by, but Samuel said, "Nor has the Lord chosen this one." Jesse had 7 of his sons pass before Samuel, but Samuel said to him, "The Lord has not chosen these." So he asked Jesse, "Are these all the sons you have?" "There is still the youngest," Jesse answered. "He is tending the sheep." Samuel said, "Send for him. We will not sit down until he arrives." So he sent for him and had him brought. He was glowing with health and had a fine appearance and handsome features. Then the Lord said, "Rise and anoint him. This is the one." So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers, and from that day on the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. So this is really, really important to remember, because David was not the tallest, he was not the strongest, he was not the best looking or the oldest or the wisest or really the most remarkable in any way, right? But in fact, he was the youngest and the easiest to overlook. His dad didn't even bother to bring him, right? He said, "Well, you're going to not be the important one. Why don't you go take care of the sheep while your other brothers are looked at for this?" But God saw what was inside of David's heart and not what was on the outside. So I stress again that this is really, really important. We're built to do great things regardless of what other people think of us. And only by trusting God will we accomplish what we were made to do, right? So again, super important. What other people think of us, what people are going to think of us, is not important. It's what God sees in us, right? So let's jump back into the Bible. We're going to look at 2 passages in the same chapter of David's first recorded great accomplishment, right? So we're going to be in 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 4 through 11, and then we're going to jump ahead in the same chapter to verses 32 through 52. A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out to the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits in a span, which my Bible says is about 9 feet 9 inches tall. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor and of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels, which it says here is about 125 pounds, which is super heavy if you think of it's a coat. That's 125 pounds, right? His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels, which it says here is about 15 pounds, which is ridiculous. His shield bearer went ahead of him. Goliath stood up and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why do you come out in line for battle? Am I not a Philistine? And are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me." If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us." Then the Philistines said, "This day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other." On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. So at this point, everybody's scared, right? So a couple more things happen, and David comes up to Saul, the king, and he says, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." Saul replied, "You are not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You are only a young man, and he has been a warrior since his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. The Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine." So Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord will be with you." Then Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head. David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried walking around because he was not used to them. "I cannot go in these," he said to Saul, "because I am not used to them." So he took them off. Then he took his staff in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, and put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand, approached this Philistine. Meanwhile, the Philistine, with a shield bearer in front of him, kept coming closer to David. He looked David over and saw that he was little more than a boy. Glowing with health and handsome, he despised him. He said to David, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" And then the Philistine cursed David by his gods. "Come here," he said, "and I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals." David said to the Philistine, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands." As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly towards the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine in the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him. David ran and stood over him. He took a hold of the Philistine's sword and drew it from the sheath. After he had killed him, he cut off his head with a sword. When the Philistines saw that their hero was dead, they turned and ran. Then the men of Israel and Judah surged forward with a shout and pursued the Philistines into the entrance of Gath and to the gates of Ekron. Their dead were strewn across the Shiraim road to the Gath and Ekron. So it's important, everybody talks about the fact that David was victorious against Goliath, right? We all know that. It's used as an analogy constantly, right? But he also turned a scared group of men into a fearless and victorious army. And this is a way bigger victory, right? So my Bible has a profile of David here that breaks it down super well of why that was possible, okay? And it breaks it into seven pieces. So number one is he had a different perspective. He didn't see an invincible giant, he saw an opportunity. He had different methods. He used what worked for him, which was a sling and a stone, instead of the sword that was conventional, that everybody else used. He had a different conviction. He realized that Goliath had no covenant with God, and he was passionate about God's covenant with him, right? He had a different motive because he heard Goliath's threat against God, not against the people. So he knew God could beat him. He had a different vision because he didn't go into it thinking this is going to make me great. He went into it and said, this is for the glory of God, right? And his experience, he didn't bring to the battle. He didn't think about how this guy was terrifying and almost 10 feet tall and going to beat him. He thought about the fact that he'd already beaten lions and bears because God had protected him, right? And finally, his attitude was different. He didn't see Goliath as a threat that was too big to hit, but as a target that was too big to miss, right? So all of this was important, and it's what made him a great leader, right? And he continued to be victorious, right? People wanted to follow him because, like we talked about, when you can do something for the people following you, those people are going to continue to want to follow you, right? So he continued to win. So after Saul died and he took over as king, he defeats army after army after army because he believed in God and he believed what God could do through him, right? However, he was not a perfect leader and he made mistakes. So we're going to talk next week about some of those mistakes, both before and after he became king. Because there's a really huge mistake that he made that everybody talks about after he was king, but he also made mistakes before he was king, before he was the guy, right? And he is always still remembered for the things that he did that were great, right? So the way I want to end this lesson is by reminding everyone that even if you make mistakes, the things that God is going to do through you are going to shine brighter than the mistakes that we're going to make as people. So we are going to be remembered for those great things that God does through us. We're not going to be remembered for those mistakes that we make because we are going to be the most critical of ourselves, right? So it's going to be easier for us to remember those mistakes than it will be for other people to remember them. So the way that we grow as leaders is by looking at a mistake and learning and moving on, rather than sitting and dwelling, because the more we dwell on a mistake, the more we just live that mistake and we don't change. So I'm going to post some discussion questions in the comments again. And I'm so excited to see you guys on Wednesday, where we're going to talk about those. If you guys have any questions, if you're new to this channel and you'd like to join in on our Discord group where we discuss this, or our Zoom group where we've been meeting for youth group on Wednesdays to talk about the lessons, please feel free to message me through here or at my email, which is SeanSheridanYM@gmail. That's SeanSheridanYM@gmail. Reach out to me. I'd love to get you connected. Love to have you part of our group. And I'm so excited to have this discussion on Wednesday. I'll see you guys then.